The old highways of Texas have stories buried under every cracked mile. People talk about desert ghosts, strange lights, skinwalkers, and shadows that run faster than coyotes. But none of those tales prepared me for what I found on Highway 281. It was supposed to be a simple stop at a cheap motel on a long, lonely drive. Just a place to rest before sunrise touched the dust again. But the deeper I went into that forgotten stretch of road, the more the air changed. The night grew colder, quieter, wrong in ways I couldn't explain. Something was watching long before I reached the neon sign. And something was waiting when I stopped. I had driven through storms, deserts, mountains, places where silence felt natural. But the silence around that motel felt alive, like it was trying to hear my thoughts. The wind didn't move, the insects didn't sing, and even my engine idle felt muted. The sign flickered like a dying star, buzzing weakly in the chill. Rooms stood in crooked lines, doors dented and walls scarred. Every window held a darkness that seemed to stare outward. I tried to convince myself it was just age, just decay, nothing more. But the air smelled of cold stone and metal, like something breathing underground. And my instincts whispered a warning I wish I'd listened to. Inside the office, the lights flickered in nervous patterns across faded wallpaper. A dusty fan spun overhead, wobbling with each slow rotation. The old man behind the counter looked like he'd been carved from the motel itself. His eyes carried a dread so old it no longer fought to be hidden. He barely spoke, barely blinked, just handed me the key. Room 12. The number hung heavily in the air, like a verdict, not a room assignment. He warned me not to make noise after midnight. But he didn't tell me why. The walk to my room felt like passing through a dream that wanted to become a nightmare. Every footstep echoed too loudly, as if the building were listening. The walls were covered in long, vertical marks, clean, precise, unnatural. The doors around me were dented from the top, not the front, as though something had climbed above them. The cold deepened with every step, settling into my bones like an unwelcome hand. The air tasted metallic, electric, charged with something unseen. I kept looking up, expecting to see someone watching from the ceiling. But the ceiling was empty. For the moment. When I entered room 12, the temperature dropped so suddenly I lost my breath. The air was wet, heavy, colder than the night outside. The walls peeled in long, curling strips, revealing older wallpaper beneath. The ceiling was marked with sweeping scratches, curved in deliberate arcs. The bed sagged as though someone had been sitting there moments before. The darkness in the bathroom doorway felt alive, thicker than shadow. I tried to shake it off, fatigue, imagination, nerves. But something in that room had already decided to wake up. I could feel it looking at me from somewhere I couldn't see. I should have left right then. Should have turned around, driven into the night, never looked back. But exhaustion blinds good judgment, and curiosity kills better men than me. I told myself I'd stay one night and forget the unease by morning. I didn't know the motel wouldn't let me go so easily. I didn't know the walls were full of things that crawled where no creature should. I didn't know the floor hid a world beneath it that should never be disturbed. And I didn't know room 12 was waiting for me specifically. It always was. Whatever you think you know about haunted motels, erase it. This wasn't haunting. This wasn't a ghost story twisted into folklore. This was something older, deeper, colder than any legend whispered over campfires. Something that walks on walls, climbs through ceilings, and breathes beneath the floors. Something that chooses people, follows them, marks them. It marked me the night I stepped into room 12. It whispered its first warning before the floor split open. And everything that followed was only the beginning. I was driving alone through the outskirts of central Texas when the sun collapsed behind the hills and turned the sky into a burning copper bruise. The highway was nearly empty, each mile pulling me deeper into a forgotten corridor of the state. Old neon signs flickered on the roadside, motels from the 1960s still standing but spiritually abandoned. The heat outside was suffocating, yet inside the car a cold drift settled around my shoulders. I told myself it was exhaustion, the kind that distorts a driver's senses. But the deeper I went, the stronger the sensation grew, like an unseen passenger had joined me. The rearview mirror caught flickers of movement I couldn't explain. I kept my eyes on the road, refusing to look twice. By the time I saw the first motel sign, I already sensed something waiting. The motel was called the Lone Cactus Inn, though the sign buzzed so weakly that most letters glowed only intermittently. The parking lot was cracked, weeds pushing through the asphalt like fingers clawing from underground. 2 cars sat there, a dusty pickup and a station wagon with windows coated in grime. When I stepped out, the cold intensified, running down my spine like an icy hand. Even the insects avoided this place, the silence was absolute. Inside the office, a wobbly ceiling fan spun with a broken rhythm, thumping at each slow rotation. No one was at the desk until an old man emerged from behind a faded curtain. His smile was polite but empty, like a mask worn too long. "You're just in time," he said, though I didn't know for what. He handed me a heavy brass key with the number 12 stamped into it. The room was on the 2nd floor, far down a hallway where the lights flickered like dying fireflies. When I asked about Wi-Fi, he chuckled as if I'd asked for something mythical. "There's no signal out here," he said. "And don't make noise after midnight. Some things get restless." The way he avoided eye contact told me he wasn't talking about guests. I didn't push further, I was too tired to care. But when I stepped out of the office again, the night felt wrong. Like I was being watched from somewhere just outside reality. The motel walkway creaked beneath my boots as I headed toward room 12. The air smelled of mildew mixed with a faint metallic tang, like dried blood on concrete. The wind had disappeared entirely, leaving the trees frozen like silhouettes. As I walked, I noticed long, clean scratches on the walls, vertical and deliberate. Not claws. Not tools. Something stranger. Each mark ran straight from the ground to the roof with impossible precision. The doors I passed had dense and deep grooves, as if something had pounded on them from above. I felt my pulse rise with every step. Still, I kept going, though instinct screamed at me to stop. Room 12 sat where the building met the shadow of a crooked mesquite tree. A dusty yellow bulb flickered over the door, barely illuminating the lock. When I opened the door, a wave of cold hit me so hard it forced a gasp from my lungs. The room smelled like old carpet soaked in rain, stale cigarettes, and forgotten time. Peeling wallpaper curled like brittle skin falling away from a corpse. The bathroom door was slightly open, darkness pooling behind it like a substance. I set my bag down and shook off a sudden dizziness that made the floor tilt under my feet. The cold thickened around me, almost sentient. As if something unseen was examining me from inches away. I sat on the edge of the bed, which sagged like an invisible weight pressed against it beside me. The lamp flickered violently before staying on, as if fighting a presence. When the room brightened, I froze at the sight of the ceiling. Arched scratch marks curved across the surface in flawless, impossible lines. Not random damage. Not decay. Intentional. As though something had crawled across the ceiling with methodical grace. My breath hitched as I traced the pattern leading toward the bathroom. Every mark stopped above the doorframe. And something inside that darkness felt awake. I approached the bathroom slowly, each step tightening the cold around my ribs. The door seemed to breathe, expanding with silent pressure. When I pushed it gently, the hinges groaned with a low, sickly sound. I flipped the light switch, but it only sparked before dying completely. The tiles inside glistened as if wet, though the air was bone dry. A faint rotten odor leaked out, carrying the weight of something long hidden. I leaned forward to look deeper, but a sudden wave of nausea forced me back. Something shifted inside the dark. Something large. I backed away quickly, returning to the center of the room. The silence grew thicker, pressing against my ears like underwater pressure. My heartbeat echoed inside my skull, loud enough to feel physical. I sat again, staring at the bathroom doorway as if expecting it to breathe. Nothing happened for a long moment. Then the temperature plummeted further, frosting the edges of the mirror. My breath formed visible clouds. The hairs on my arms rose as if touched. My instincts begged me to leave, but exhaustion pinned me in place. I lay down, hoping sleep might dull my fear. But the moment my eyes closed, I heard it, slow, deliberate scratching above me. Fingertips dragging across plaster with intention. I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling, pulse hammering. The sound shifted into soft thumping. Then pacing. Not footsteps walking across the ceiling. Footsteps walking along it. As though gravity meant nothing to whatever was up there. The steps traveled from one side of the ceiling to the other with eerie precision. It moved slowly, curiously, tracing the shape of the room. My breathing grew shallow as the steps paused directly over my body. The silence that followed felt alive and suffocating. Then the ceiling creaked downward ever so slightly. As if something leaned closer, pressing its weight through the plaster. Terror froze me solid. I couldn't blink. I couldn't move. A soft tapping began, 3 taps, evenly spaced. Then the taps crawled sideways across the ceiling. Down the wall. Toward the door. The plaster above the doorframe bulged outward in a slow, unnatural swell. The shadows stretched and twisted, forming impossible shapes. I felt my throat tighten as the truth set in. It wasn't on the ceiling anymore. It was moving inside the walls. The bulging shifted downward, accompanied by the sound of limbs sliding through hollow spaces. Long limbs. Too flexible. Too many joints. The scraping grew louder as the entity descended toward the floor. I stumbled backward until I hit the dresser, breath trapped in my chest. The sliding stopped right beside the bed. Silence followed, thick as tar. Then a shadow stretched out from the baseboard, slow and deliberate. And something began to emerge. Something that should not have existed in this world. The shadow stretching from the baseboard thickened as if gathering substance from the darkness itself. I pressed my back harder against the dresser, unable to tear my eyes away. The shape extended slowly, almost curiously, like a blind hand searching for new territory. Then something pale slid outward, skin the color of old bone, impossibly smooth. It wasn't a hand. It wasn't a limb. It was something between the two, long and jointed in too many places. The appendage curled toward the bed frame with silent precision. And the room seemed to tighten around me as if holding its breath. Another limb emerged, then another, each bending at angles that broke logic. They moved like they were feeling the air, sampling it, sensing me. The scratch marks across the ceiling suddenly made terrible sense. This thing didn't walk the way living creatures walk. It gripped surfaces. It crawled in any direction, across any plane. And now it was exploring my room like an animal testing a new cage. The limbs pressed into the carpet, indenting it without sound. The rest of its body still hid within the wall. A long ripple passed through the wallpaper as if the creature shifted its weight. The plaster cracked softly, small flakes drifting to the floor like ash. I could hear it breathing, slow, deep, like air passing through a hollow chest. The breathing came from inside the wall, vibrating the boards. Then the creature pushed farther out, revealing a torso too thin to contain organs. Its ribs were visible under the skin, long and misshapen like stretched wire. The thing heaved, adjusting itself. It was emerging with purpose, not panic. As if it had done this hundreds of times. I wanted to run, but my legs felt fused to the floor. Fear had glued every instinct to the inside of my body. The creature's head appeared next, smooth, elongated, almost serpent-like. But where its face should have been, there were no eyes. No mouth. Just a flat surface, pale and expressionless, like unfinished clay. It turned that blank face toward me anyway. And the cold in the room deepened until my fingers went numb. The air tasted metallic, like electricity before a storm. The faceless head tilted as if analyzing me. It didn't need eyes to see, I felt its awareness penetrating my thoughts. A crawling pressure pushed into my skull, searching, probing, curious. The entity leaned forward, joints clicking softly like damp sticks. The blank face came inches closer, freezing the air between us. I felt something whisper in the back of my mind, not in words but impressions. Loneliness. Hunger. Recognition. The creature lifted itself fully out of the wall, unfolding like a nightmare blooming. Its limbs were long enough to touch both walls of the room without stretching. Its spine was curved in strange angles, yet it moved gracefully, almost elegantly. The temperature dropped so low the bedside lamp flickered violently. My breath turned solid white, hanging in the air. The entity crawled upward, clinging to the wall like a spider returning home. It positioned itself above the bed, its limbs splayed wide. The blank face pointed downward toward the mattress. It was waiting. A sudden knock echoed through the wall, sharp and urgent. The creature froze, limbs tensing. Another knock followed, 3 rhythmic strikes. This time from the room beside mine. The entity's head twisted toward the sound, its movements jerking like a puppet yanked by strings. Then the knock came again, but from inside my wall. A Morse-like sequence, rapid and deliberate. The creature shifted nervously, shrinking closer to the ceiling. Something else was communicating with it. I watched in horror as faint tapping replied from the plaster near the bathroom. The creature turned its blank face toward that sound. 2 knocks answered from behind the headboard. Then 3 more from the ceiling above the door. The wall began to tremble lightly, dust falling in a thin stream. It was as if the entire motel had awakened, room by room. Something was inside each wall, each hollow space, spreading through the building. I could hear their limbs sliding, synchronized. They were not alone. And neither was I. The creature above the bed turned back toward me, its limbs extending slowly. A shiver crawled across my skin as it lowered itself halfway down the wall. It moved with more caution now, as if trying not to provoke the others. The tapping continued, spreading like a language I couldn't understand. It felt like a warning. Or a message. Or a signal that something bigger was coming. The creature leaned closer. The cold around me thickened until I could barely move. The lamp beside the bed popped loudly, plunging the room into darkness. I gasped, blinded, my fingers scrambling for my phone. The sound of limbs scraping across every surface erupted at once. Ceiling. Walls. Floor. The motel groaned as if something heavy crawled through its very bones. Whispers, not voices, but movements, passed all around me. My throat clenched in terror. The entity perched above me exhaled, long and hollow. And the darkness felt alive with thousands of limbs. I finally found my phone, its weak screen glowing like a dying ember. The light revealed the creature inches above my face. Its faceless head hovered so close I could feel the cold radiating from it. Behind it, the walls bulged with moving shapes pressing outward. Dozens of them. All shifting toward my room. All converging. The tapping intensified into frantic, overlapping signals. Whatever was happening, it was accelerating. Then, silence. Not the soft quiet of night, but a sudden, absolute void. The shadows froze. The scratching ceased. Even the cold held still, suspended in unnatural stillness. The creature's limbs tightened, clutching the ceiling with rigid fingers. Its head jerked toward the door. Slow, measured footsteps echoed outside in the hallway. Something heavy was approaching. And the creatures inside the walls were afraid of it. The footsteps outside the door were unlike anything I had heard in my life, slow, heavy, and dragging. Each step sounded as if something enormous was pulling its weight forward unwillingly. The entity above me pressed itself flatter against the ceiling, limbs trembling. For the first time, I sensed fear coming from it. Not directed at me, but at whatever was approaching. The tapping inside the walls ceased completely, ending in abrupt, unfinished bursts. The silence that followed felt unnatural, like a vacuum swallowing sound. Then another step echoed, closer. And the doorknob rattled softly. My breath stopped in my chest as the metal handle quivered under invisible pressure. It didn't turn, it simply trembled, as if something was hovering inches from it. The creature on the ceiling shifted again, its limbs curling inward defensively. Its faceless head pointed directly at the door, as though waiting for it to burst open. Dust drifted from the molding with every slow step outside. The hallway lights flickered violently, shining under the doorframe. Shadows stretched and distorted in strange, twisted shapes. Something was pacing outside my room. And it knew I was inside. The entity lowered itself slowly, sliding down the wall like melting wax. Its limbs pressed flat against the paint, ready to flee back into the hollow spaces. It moved with a quiet urgency I had not seen before. Whatever approached held authority over the creatures in the walls. The entity's movements were jittery, tense, almost panicked. The bed's metal frame vibrated softly as the footsteps stopped in front of my door. Silence gripped the hallway. Not even a breath escaped through the thin motel walls. The air felt ready to shatter. A low groan came from the other side of the door, long, strained, and disturbingly human. It was the kind of sound someone makes when lifting something impossibly heavy. But it also carried a tone of resentment, like the groan was forced through clenched teeth. The creature beside me recoiled at the noise, its limbs shaking violently. Then the groan turned into slow breathing, deep and ragged. I could hear it pulling air through thick lungs. Breathing in. Breathing out. Right outside my door. The doorframe creaked as if something leaned against it from the hallway. The wood bent inward subtly, like a weight was being pressed onto it. My pulse throbbed wildly as I watched the door bulge with faint pressure. Was it trying to come in? Or was it simply listening? The breathing grew louder, resonating through the thin motel walls. The creature in my room froze, lowering its head submissively. I had never imagined a monster could bow. But this one did. A thick shadow slid beneath the door, spreading across the carpet like oil. It pulsed once, contracting as if breathing independently. The cold in the room sharpened to a stabbing chill. The entity on the wall retreated quickly, disappearing halfway back into the plaster. Only its blank face remained visible, peeking out like a child hiding from punishment. The shadow under the door thickened, rising in height until it reached the bottom of the bed frame. My throat tightened painfully as I stepped back instinctively. The darkness seemed aware of me. It leaned. The creature inside the wall made a soft scratching noise, fear, not aggression. Then I heard something worse, a deep sniffing sound at the door. Slow, deliberate inhales. As if the thing outside was testing the scent of what was inside the room. The metal of the doorknob frosted over instantly. Breath clouds poured from my mouth, shaking with terror. The sniffing stopped. A slow exhale pressed through the cracks. The air smelled like rust and wet soil. The footsteps resumed, but slower this time, circling my door with predatory patience. Each step vibrated through the floor as though the creature was enormous. The entity in the wall followed the footsteps with its faceless head, tracking every sound. I pressed myself into the farthest corner, trying to stay out of sight. The shadow under the door thinned, retreating slightly. But the presence remained. It lingered outside with an intelligence that felt older than the motel itself. The lights flickered in rapid, panicked bursts. and the hallway fell silent once more. Then something tapped gently on my door, 3 soft knocks. But these weren't like the signals from the wall creatures. These knocks sounded intentional, conscious, almost polite. The entity in the wall shuddered violently at the sound. It withdrew completely, vanishing into the plaster. The tapping continued, steady and patient. I felt the hair rise on the back of my neck. Who, or what, was knocking? It wasn't trying to break in. It wanted me to answer. A voice followed, soft and slow, dripping with exhaustion. Room 12. My blood iced instantly. The voice sounded like the old man from the office, but distorted, like he was speaking through thick mud. Another long breath rasped through the door. I couldn't move. My entire body seized as the creature outside leaned closer. Come out. The hallway groaned under its shifting weight. And then the doorknob turned. The metal twisted silently, without resistance, as if guided by invisible fingers. I watched in frozen terror as the latch clicked free. The door opened only an inch, just enough for cold air to seep through. Only darkness stood on the other side. Not a figure. Not a silhouette. Just a void with weight and intention. The breathing returned, deep, patient, hungry. And the door slowly pushed wider. The entity in the wall reappeared, its limbs spreading defensively across the ceiling. It made a soft clicking noise I hadn't heard before, almost like a warning. The shadow at the doorway hesitated. Not retreating, just pausing. As if calculating. The 2 forces faced one another in absolute silence. I didn't know which one was worse. Only that I was trapped between them. And the night was far from over. The door creaked wider, inch by inch, as though an invisible hand were testing the room's air. The darkness beyond the threshold seemed thick enough to swallow light, stretching unnaturally into the hallway. I couldn't see a body or a face, only a void with weight, patience, and intelligence. A cold wind slipped through the opening, brushing past my ankles like a warning. Behind me, the entity in the ceiling tensed, its limbs curling inward. The soft clicking noises it made grew faster, more urgent. It was afraid. Not of me. But of the thing at the door. The shadow paused, as if aware of the second presence above me. For a moment, the air vibrated with a tension that felt almost electric. The hallway lights flickered once, twice, then failed completely. Darkness swallowed everything beyond the thin slice of my room's dimness. I heard slow breathing, deep, hungry, exhausted, echoing just beyond the frame. The creature in the wall emitted another clicking pattern, one I felt rather than heard. My pulse hammered so violently I thought I might pass out. The space between the door and the bed shrank in my mind, collapsing into fear. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The presence outside leaned closer, making the wood of the doorframe creak softly. Its breath rolled across the floor like a cold fog, carrying an earthy, decaying scent. The entity on the ceiling lowered itself further until it hung directly above me. Its limbs splayed wide, forming a protective cage around my position. I didn't know if it meant to shield me or trap me. The 2 forces stared at each other without faces, yet somehow entirely aware. The silence thickened to a suffocating weight. Then the shadow at the door exhaled, slow and heavy. The sound rattled the glass of the bedside lamp. Something massive shifted outside, brushing against the hallway wall. The drywall groaned as if the creature's body was scraping along its length. It moved slightly, revealing a shape, tall, impossibly tall, shoulders scraping the ceiling. But its features remained hidden, wrapped in liquid black darkness. Only the outline of its bulk hinted at its unnatural size. The entity above me let out a sharp clicking burst, like an alarm. The shadow paused again, as if listening. Then a low growl vibrated through the hallway, deep enough to shake the floorboards. My knees buckled from the sound. The creature outside stepped closer, and the floor trembled with each shift of weight. The shadow reached across the threshold, stretching like a hand made of darkness. I felt its cold tendrils curling toward me, brushing the air inches from my face. The entity in the ceiling reacted instantly, dropping lower with predatory speed. Its limbs slammed into the ground around me, forming a barrier. One limb struck the shadow, causing it to recoil with a wet, guttural growl. The walls shook violently from the impact. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The bed slid an inch across the floor from the force. The shadow retaliated, slamming into the doorframe with devastating force. The wood cracked, splintering under the pressure of something enormous. The creature's breathing deepened, turning into an animalistic heaving. The entity beside me hissed in a clicking rhythm, frantic and sharp. The motel walls trembled again, and faint tapping returned from within them. But this time the taps were chaotic, frightened, uncoordinated. The other wall creatures were panicking. Something ancient hovered at the door. And they wanted nothing to do with it. The temperature dropped further until frost formed across the carpet. My breath hung in front of me in thick clouds, drifting upward. The shadow at the door pressed forward again, forcing the door open wider. The wood groaned like a dying animal. The entity near me arched its limbs, positioning itself for another strike. A low rumble echoed from the hallway, impossibly deep, like shifting stones underground. The darkness beyond the threshold pulsed with a heartbeat-like rhythm. The motel itself seemed to hold its breath. Every object, every shadow, every limb froze in place. Then the voice returned, soft, stretched, exhausted. Room 12. The way it spoke twisted my stomach. It was the old man's voice again, but wrong, hollowed out, twisted through impossible lungs. The creature outside leaned closer, pressing a massive weight against the doorframe. The clicking from the ceiling creature stopped entirely. Silence fell so abruptly it felt staged. Even my heartbeat seemed to pause. A second whisper followed. "Come, with me." The door suddenly swung inward with a violent jerk, slamming into the wall. I staggered backward, barely avoiding the impact. Cold air exploded into the room, sweeping under the bed and across the walls. The shadow expanded, filling the doorway, towering over the ceiling height. The entity beside me clung to the ceiling with desperate force, its limbs trembling. The darkness reached toward me with unmistakable intent. The room tilted, the floor seeming to shift under an unseen pressure. The sense of gravity felt wrong. As if something massive had entered the space between moments. The creature in the wall lunged forward, striking at the shadow again. Its limbs whipped through the air with unnatural force, cracking the plaster. The shadow recoiled, but not far. It responded with an earth-rattling slam against the floorboards. The entire building shook as though hit by an earthquake. A roar, distorted, guttural, and ancient, erupted from the hallway. The sound tore through my chest like claws. The entity beside me crawled backward rapidly, retreating toward the corner. It clicked frantically, signaling retreat. For a moment, everything froze. The shadow stood at the doorway, massive and silent. The ceiling creature crouched low, its limbs shaking violently. The air felt pulled tight between them. I was in the center of their invisible standoff. Then, without warning, the shadow extended again, slow, deliberate, unstoppable. Its cold presence washed over me like a wave. The room spun. And the motel lights flickered back to life in a burst of white. What I saw in that instant made my blood turn to ice. For the first time, the shadow had a shape, more defined than before. A long arm reached inward, its fingers impossibly stretched. Where the old man's voice had come from, there was no man, only a hollow mask of darkness. Behind it, the hallway bent unnaturally, as if space itself warped around the creature. The entity on the ceiling hissed one last time before vanishing into the wall. The door slammed shut on its own, sealing me in. The room dimmed again. And I realized the shadow hadn't left. It was already inside. The air in the room thickened instantly, growing dense enough to feel against my skin. I backed into the corner without realizing it, my fingers scraping the peeling wallpaper. The shadow no longer stood at the doorway, it had seeped into the room like a spreading stain. It stretched across the ceiling, crawled down the walls, and pooled across the floor in shifting waves. It moved with a slow, deliberate intelligence, as though tasting every inch of the space. The cold deepened until my teeth began to chatter uncontrollably. I searched the walls for the creature that had been protecting me, but the plaster remained still. No clicking. No movement. I was alone with whatever had come through the door. The shadow thickened in the center of the room, rising like smoke condensing into flesh. A figure began to form, first the outline of shoulders, then arms, then a head that sat far too high. It grew taller with each passing second, its shape sharpening unnaturally. But its face remained a void, a hollow absence where features should have been. It leaned slightly forward, as though studying me with eyes it didn't possess. My chest tightened painfully, every breath a sharp, icy blade. The room felt smaller, walls inching inward. The floorboards creaked under a weight not meant for this world. I forced myself to look away, but the presence anchored my gaze like a hook. A deep rumble, half growl, half exhale, rolled through the air. The sound vibrated inside my ribcage, shaking my bones. It wasn't the breath of the ceiling creatures, it was heavier, older, more deliberate. Then the voice returned, closer and clearer. Room 12. The word slid across the room like oil, sticky and invasive. The shadow's upper body tilted slightly as it addressed me directly. You came back. A tremor ran through my spine that nearly took my legs out. I tried to form words, even something simple like, "What do you want?" But my throat locked shut, refusing to cooperate. The creature didn't seem bothered by my silence. It stepped closer, each movement bending the shadows around its form. The carpet flattened beneath invisible weight, indenting as though something massive had shifted. The air between us crackled with a cold so intense it felt electric. My breath slowed to shallow wisps. Every instinct screamed at me to run. But the shadow cut off every possible escape. The wall behind me cracked softly. Not from the shadow, but from the creature that had fled earlier. A faint clicking echoed through the plaster, trembling like a frightened animal. It didn't return to help me. It was warning me. The shadow turned its faceless head toward the sound, the sudden movement sharp and violent. The clicking cut off instantly, replaced by dead silence in the walls. The lesser entities feared this thing. And now they hid from it entirely. The shadow lowered itself toward me, bending at impossible angles. Its arm extended, long and thin like a stretched silhouette. Fingers formed from darkness, tapering into sharp, undefined points. They hovered inches from my face, close enough for the cold to burn. I grabbed the bedside lamp and swung it blindly. The metal passed through the shadow as though cutting through smoke. But the creature reacted, its form flickering, wavering, distorting violently. A deep rasp tore from it. It wasn't pain. It was irritation. The motel groaned around us, boards shifting under the pressure of unseen forces. The shadow expanded suddenly, filling half the room with swirling darkness. The temperature plunged so fast frost spread across the mirror in seconds. The creature swelled, its upper body growing broader, taller, more defined. Its arms cracked outward, stretching until they nearly touched both walls. The room pulsed with a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I felt it vibrating through the floorboards, through my shoes, through my lungs. The heartbeat wasn't physical, it was dimensional. Like something was pushing against reality. "Come, with me," the voice repeated, deeper now. The command rolled across the room like thunder trapped in a tunnel. The shadow leaned closer, inches from my face again. Though faceless, it radiated a gaze I could feel, ancient, hungry, unblinking. My vision blurred as the cold gnawed at my sanity. Every instinct in my body screamed that stepping toward it meant erasure. Still, my legs twitched involuntarily under its influence. It was pulling at me, not physically, but mentally. Pulling me toward the threshold of something not meant for the living. The wall behind the creature bulged suddenly. A clicking burst exploded from inside the plaster, loud, desperate. Another creature pushed partially through the wall, its limbs shaking violently. Not to protect me this time, but to pull me away from the shadow. It grabbed my shoulder with cold, spindly fingers and yanked me backward. The shadow retaliated instantly, slamming an arm through the air. The wall creature shrieked in a clicking frenzy and retreated back inside. A crack ripped across the plaster where it had been standing. The shadow turned its full attention back toward me, the air around it writhing. It grew taller again, stretching until its head nearly touched the ceiling. The ceiling sagged from the pressure, drops of dust falling like snow. The entire room tilted to one side as reality buckled under its presence. My body felt weightless for a moment, as though gravity had broken. The darkness surged forward, covering the floor like a rising tide. It reached my shoes first. The cold burned through the soles like acid. And then the shadow whispered one last command. Follow. The floor beneath me cracked with a sharp snap, then dropped. The boards gave way under an invisible force, splintering outward. Darkness rose from below, swallowing the bottom half of the room. The shadow stepped into the collapse, pulling it wider with its presence. I stumbled backward, collapsing onto the bed as it tilted dangerously. The room warped around me, walls bending inward like a collapsing box. The creature leaned forward, its arm reaching through the falling debris. It wasn't trying to destroy the room. It was opening a passage. And it wanted me to go through it. The floor split open beneath the shadow's influence, widening into a jagged mouth of darkness. Dust rose in thick clouds as the boards snapped and fell into the void below. The room trembled violently, as if the motel were being pulled apart from its foundation. I clung to the edge of the bed, the only thing still anchored to the floor. Cold air surged upward from the opening, a cold that felt deeper than simple temperature. It carried the scent of wet stone, old soil, and something ancient. Something forgotten. The shadow leaned over the gap, extending an arm toward me. Its faceless head tilted, waiting for my compliance. I tried to pull myself away, but my limbs felt heavy, as if tied down by invisible ropes. The shadow's presence tugged at my mind, pulling thoughts away like loose threads. Images formed briefly, hallways that weren't hallways, walls that crawled, stairs that led downward forever. None of it belonged to this world. The bed slid an inch toward the hole, dragged by a force I couldn't see. I scrambled to the far end, hands shaking, but the mattress tilted dangerously. The boards beneath it cracked loud enough to echo. The shadow extended further, its arms stretching impossibly long. It wanted me to fall. A sudden clicking burst erupted from the wall beside me. The ceiling creature reappeared partially, its limbs trembling violently from fear. It clicked in rapid, frantic patterns, warnings, commands, something urgent. It wasn't trying to save me from the shadow. It was trying to save me from the place below. Its long limbs snapped forward, pushing the bed away from the collapsing floor. The shadow recoiled and twisted upward, rising to full height. Its form expanded, boiling with anger. The two entities faced one another like ancient rivals. The wall creature retreated halfway, clinging to the plaster like a trapped animal. Its clicking grew louder, more frantic, echoing through the hollow spaces. Other creatures stirred inside the walls, tapping in chaotic fear. Something deep beneath the motel answered with a low rumble. The shadow turned its attention toward the hole, as if listening. The rumble grew louder, ancient, massive, resonant. It vibrated up through the broken boards and into my bones. The ceiling creature froze completely. Whatever lived below was worse. The shadow leaned over the hole again, its faceless head angled downward. Its arm reached toward the darkness, beckoning something unseen. The cold intensified until my breath crystallized in the air. The rumble grew irregular, shaking dust from every surface. The shadow stretched its limbs further, like it was calling to something far beneath us. The motel structure groaned and popped as screws loosened in the walls. The drywall bulged outward in several spots. Something below was responding. And it was coming upward. A beam snapped overhead, dropping a chunk of plaster onto the broken floor. The shadow backed away from the hole, turning fully toward me once more. Its void-like body expanded, shadows rolling off it like waves. The ceiling creature clicked sharply, as if pleading. The shadow ignored it, taking one long step forward. Its foot pressed into the carpet, sinking too deep, bending space around it. The air warped in its presence, the room bending in impossible angles. I felt myself sliding toward the hole again. Gravity twisted like a knot. Instinct took over. I lunged toward the bathroom, the only part of the room untouched by the collapse. My feet scraped across the tilting carpet as the shadow's arm whipped toward me. The air behind me bent with its reach, cold slicing across my back. I threw myself inside and slammed the door. The hinges rattled violently as the entire room pitched sideways. Tiles cracked under my feet, but the floor held. The darkness pressed against the bathroom door like a living pressure. The shadow exhaled, long and furious. The bathroom light flickered, then died completely. I fumbled backward until my spine hit the cold tile wall. The clicking noise returned, this time inside the bathroom walls. A creature emerged partially, its limbs shaking from terror. It clicked gently, almost soothingly, as if trying to guide me. The shadow slammed into the bathroom door again, cracking the wood. I covered my ears as the room shook violently. The plaster creature extended one limb toward me. A gesture of warning, not malice. The floor outside the bathroom tore open entirely with a roaring crack. I could hear furniture falling into the newly formed void. The shadow growled, an inhuman, enraged vibration that shook every tile. The bathroom door bowed inward from the pressure of its blows. The ceiling creature clicked frantically, tunneling deeper into the wall. Its panic was contagious. The cold seeped through the cracks around the doorframe. The void below the motel roared again, louder, closer. Something was climbing upward. A long fissure split the bathroom ceiling, dust raining down in soft cascades. The floor trembled under my feet, vibrating with the rhythm of something massive. The shadow outside stopped pounding suddenly. Silence stretched thin and sharp as a blade. Even the clicking inside the walls grew quiet. The cold receded slightly, not gone, but pulled back. The shadow moved. Not toward the door, but toward the widening hole in the room outside. I heard its limbs scraping the broken boards as it approached the void. The sound was deliberate, steady, like it was greeting something far below. A deep, ancient exhale rose from the darkness beneath the motel. The shadow answered with a low, resonant groan. I felt the air pressure shift, pulling downward. Dust spiraled into the gap like water swirling into a drain. The bathroom door shook once more, but lightly this time. Not an attack. A warning. Then I heard it. A voice rising from the depths below. Not words, but a chorus of layered, echoing tones, ancient, hollow, mournful. The shadow growled back, its form trembling with excitement. The motel trembled harder, tiles cracking under my feet. The ceiling creature clicked in terror, retreating deeper into the wall. Even the walls seemed to pull away from the sound. Something enormous was reaching the underside of room 12. The bathroom floor dipped once, as if pressed from below. A second dip followed, deeper. The cold surged upward again, flooding the small room. The shadow roared with anticipation, leaning fully over the hole. The ancient voice from below grew louder, echoing like a cavern calling home. I stared at the cracked bathroom door, heart hammering. Then the shadow whispered through the splintering wood. Not yet. And the thing beneath the motel finally reached the surface. The floor outside the bathroom split with a deafening crack as something massive pressed upward. The boards curled like paper, bending around an unseen shape forcing its way through. Cold air erupted from the gap in violent bursts, carrying dust and the smell of deep earth. The shadow creature leaned over the widening hole, trembling in anticipation. Its faceless head stretched forward, as if greeting an old companion. The ancient voice rising from below grew clearer, layered, mournful, impossibly deep. It sounded like stone grinding against stone. The motel lights flickered in terrified response. The structure groaned as if begging for mercy. A massive limb emerged from the darkness, long, pale, and jointed like the ceiling creatures. But this one was thicker, stronger, coated in soot and ancient grime. It gripped the broken edge of the floor with fingers that bent backward too far. Plaster rained down as the limb pulled upward with agonizing slowness. Another limb followed, dragging itself into the dying glow of the motel room. The shadow creature stepped back slightly, bowing its shape in respect. My breath froze in my throat. Whatever was rising was not just another wall creature. It was something older, something the others obeyed. The ancient entity's head emerged next, elongated like the others, but wider, heavier. Its faceless surface was cracked, split by deep fissures glowing faintly from within. Cold light pulsed through the cracks, beating like a slow, ancient heart. The thing exhaled a plume of frigid air that swept the room. The shadow creature lowered itself even further, limbs folded tightly like in worship. Dust spiraled upward from the hole as the ancient being settled on the broken floor. Its presence pushed the shadows back, bending the room around it. My ears rang from the pressure change. The walls moaned like living things under strain. The ancient being turned its faceless head toward the bathroom. Even without eyes, I felt its attention pierce the door, digging into my thoughts. The cold thickened, surrounding me like a heavy mantle. Tiles under my feet vibrated from its gaze. I couldn't breathe properly, each inhale shallow and sharp. The creature clicked once, a deep sound echoing inside the walls. Not threatening. Not curious. Summoning. The shadow creature responded immediately, rising beside the ancient being. It elongated its body, stretching impossibly tall, as though preparing for a ritual. Both entities leaned over the broken floor, listening to something beneath the motel. A deep tremor rolled through the foundation, shaking dust from the ceiling. More clicking emerged from the walls, hundreds of tiny tremors of fear. The lesser creatures hid deeper, retreating from whatever command was being issued. The room pulsed with cold, bending the air itself. Then the ancient being shifted its massive arm. It reached toward the bathroom door. I stepped back instinctively, my shoulder hitting the cracked sink. The limb pressed against the door, making the wood ripple inward like fabric. A low groan rumbled through the entire frame. The shadow creature watched silently, its form twitching with anticipation. The ancient being pushed harder, its fingers bending through matter like wet clay. The door bowed inward until I could see the wood fibers separating. The tiles beneath me shook from the pressure. The cold intensified until my breath came out in shaking clouds. I pressed myself against the far wall, nowhere left to go. Suddenly, the ancient being paused. Its head lifted, turning slightly toward the ceiling. A new sound filled the room, a high, sharp clicking, faster and louder than any before. Dozens of creatures inside the walls clicked in unison, a frantic, alarmed chorus. They weren't summoning. They were warning. The shadow creature stiffened, turning toward the wall. The ancient being withdrew its limb from the bathroom door. The clicking grew louder, more urgent. Something else was coming. The motel groaned violently as another tremor shook the foundation. But this one didn't come from below, it came from above. The ceiling bulged downward as if a massive weight pressed against it. Dust poured down like rain, coating the broken floor in white. The shadow creature hissed, its shape flickering erratically. The ancient entity's limbs tensed, gripping the broken boards. The clicking inside the walls turned frantic, almost panicked. A deep crack tore across the ceiling in a jagged line. Something enormous was descending. The ceiling split open with a sharp, explosive snap. Cold air blasted downward as another faceless limb tore through the plaster. This one was smaller than the ancient being, but far larger than the wall creatures. It moved with violent strength, ripping the ceiling open wider. Shards of plaster crashed onto the floor, bouncing off the shadow creature's form. The ancient being turned its head sharply toward the intruder. The air between them pulsed with tension. The bathroom walls creaked behind me. I held my breath, trapped between titans. A massive form dropped halfway through the ceiling, limbs spreading out like roots. Its faceless head twisted in several impossible angles, scanning the room. The shadow creature curled backward, giving the newcomer space. The ancient being exhaled a cold plume, its internal cracks glowing brighter. The newcomer hissed sharply, a piercing, metallic sound that rattled my skull. The two entities stared at each other in absolute silence. It felt like watching predators decide whether to fight. The air grew heavy with ancient intent. And I realized I didn't matter to them anymore. The newcomer dropped fully into the room, landing on the broken floor with a seismic thud. The board splintered under its weight. The ancient being shifted forward, limbs sliding across the fragments. The two faceless giants leaned toward one another, their movements slow and deliberate. I felt the cold push against my chest like an invisible wall. The shadow creature retreated even further, trembling at the edges of the room. The clicking inside the walls turned into a chaotic storm of fear. The ceiling continued to crumble, chunks falling dangerously close. Then the newcomer spoke, not with words, but with a deep vibrating tone. The ancient being responded with a low groaning resonance. Their tones clashed like thunder colliding with stone. My vision blurred from the pressure. Dust swirled upward in spirals, drawn to the center of the room. The motel groaned under the strain of their presence. The bathroom door cracked further, bending under shifting forces. I covered my ears, but the sound wasn't physical, it crawled through my bones. The two giants leaned closer, their faceless heads inches apart. And the entire motel seemed to hold its breath. The two faceless giants remained inches apart, their towering forms bending the air around them. The deep tones they emitted collided like seismic waves, shaking dust loose from every corner. The shadow creature crouched low, folding its limbs in a defensive posture. The wall creatures clicked wildly, their panic echoing through the hollow spaces. The newcomer's limbs twitched with sudden tension, vibrating like stretched wires. The ancient being straightened its spine, cracks glowing brighter with each pulse. Cold poured from both entities in overlapping waves. The room dimmed as shadows tightened around their forms. The motel strained under the weight of their silent conversation. The newcomer shifted first, a sharp, snapping movement that cracked the remaining ceiling beams. It released a piercing, metallic screech that made my vision blur with pain. The ancient being answered with a slow, crushing rumble that vibrated deep into my ribs. The tones clashed again, sending loose tiles shattering on the floor. The creatures in the walls scurried deeper, their clicking turning into frantic static. The shadow creature sank even lower, quivering under the pressure of the giants' exchange. The air shimmered between them, warping like heat rising off asphalt. I clung to the cracked sink, trying to remain upright. Every breath burned cold. Suddenly, the ancient being thrust one massive limb toward the newcomer. The limb struck the floor, cracking it open even wider. Shards of wood flew in every direction, clattering across the bathroom tiles. The newcomer retaliated instantly, slamming its own limb downward like a hammer. A shockwave rippled through the room, knocking me to my knees. Plaster collapsed from the ceiling in thick chunks. The shadow creature scrambled away toward a corner, its form flickering wildly. The giants faced each other again, settling into a dangerous stillness. The cold deepened until my lips went numb. A long, guttural vibration rolled through the motel, rising from below once more. The ancient being turned its head slightly, as if listening to the depths that called it. The newcomer responded with a sharp hiss, clicking variations hidden beneath the tone. Their faceless heads pulsed faintly with each exchange. The cold thickened into a suffocating presence, coating the air like ice fog. The holes in the floor pulsed with faint, rhythmic light, something below responding. I crawled backward until my spine met the far tiled wall. My breath came in small, erratic clouds. I didn't know which monster terrified me more. For a moment, the giants moved in perfect synchronization. Both leaned forward, limbs sliding across the ruined floor. Both angled their faceless heads toward the bathroom door, toward me. Not in aggression, but in recognition. A deep pulse spread through the room like a heartbeat shared between titans. The walls vibrated with the force of their combined attention. I felt a pressure in my mind, pushing, prying, testing my memories. Images flashed, highway lights, the motel sign, room 12's door. They were searching my thoughts. I squeezed my eyes shut, but the pressure continued. The newcomer's resonance sank deeper, threading through consciousness. In that moment, I sensed something horrifying beneath their communication. They weren't trying to harm me, yet. They were deciding what I was. Clicking erupted again from inside the walls, louder this time, frantic. The lesser creatures weren't attacking, they were begging the giants to stop. The giants ignored them completely. The pressure intensified until my skull throbbed. Then the tones suddenly ceased. The silence that followed was suffocating, thick as wet cement. The giants remained frozen, limbs poised in unnatural angles. The motel seemed to sag under the weight of their stillness. Even the air felt afraid to move. Then, slowly, the ancient being extended a limb toward me. Its fingers curled like roots searching for soil. The newcomer trembled violently, emitting a short, sharp hiss of objection. The ancient being ignored it. The limb inched closer. I pushed myself deeper into the corner, heart hammering wildly. The limb stopped inches from my chest, cold radiating from it like poison. The ancient being tilted its head, cracks brightening to a near-white glow. A low hum emanated from its body, steady, rhythmic, probing. The newcomer hissed again, louder this time, slamming a limb into the floor. The boards buckled and split beneath the impact. Dust rained down in furious waves. The ancient being didn't retreat. Instead, the glow in its cracks intensified. The glow pulsed once. Then surged outward like a shockwave. The shadow creature shrieked, shrinking into a trembling silhouette. The wall creatures retreated deeper, clicking in terrified unison. The newcomer staggered, limbs twisting under the wave of energy. I felt the pulse pass through me like freezing wind. My vision blurred instantly, colors draining from the world. The cold stabbed deeper, reaching bone. The ancient being leaned closer, its limb brushing my chest lightly. A bright flash, silent but violent, filled the entire room. For a fraction of a second, I saw everything illuminated. The cracks in the ancient being, glowing like molten ice. The newcomer's form twitching in upheaval. The shadow creature curled into itself like a dying flame. The bathroom tiles fracturing under invisible pressure. The floorboards dissolving further into darkness. My own hands turning pale from the intense cold. Then the light collapsed inward. Darkness swallowed the room again. But not the same darkness from before, this one pulsed faintly with cold light. The ancient being withdrew its limb, cracks dimming slightly. The newcomer steadied itself, hissing in long, furious tones. The shadow creature crawled into a corner, afraid to move. The wall creatures clicked in rhythmic panic, warning of something unseen. The ancient being turned toward me once more. And for the first time, it spoke in clear, unmistakable words. "You do not belong." The words echoed through the fractured room like a whisper carried by winter itself. "You do not belong." Each syllable vibrated inside my chest, cold and heavy, as though carved into my bones. The ancient being's faceless head tilted slightly, cracks glowing with a dim, icy pulse. The newcomer hissed sharply in protest, limbs twitching with restless agitation. The shadow creature retreated deeper into a corner, shrinking to avoid notice. The wall creatures clicked frantically, their panic spreading like wildfire. The motel strained under the combined pressure of their presence. I swallowed hard, terrified to breathe. The ancient being extended its limb toward me again, slower this time. Its fingers hovered just above my chest, radiating cold like liquid nitrogen. The glow within its cracks pulsed with rhythm, matching a heartbeat I couldn't recognize. It wasn't alive the way any creature should be, it was something older, deeper, elemental. The pressure in the air thickened, closing around me like invisible hands. The newcomer turned sharply, releasing a warning hiss that rippled the shadows. Its limb slammed into the broken floor, widening the cracks. Dust swirled upward as the air vibrated violently. The ancient being ignored it. Without warning, the newcomer lunged forward. Its limb arched down like a falling guillotine, striking near my feet. The tiles exploded into shards, slicing across my arms and face. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stop a scream. The impact sent a shockwave that rattled the bathroom door off its hinges. The ancient being recoiled slightly, its cracks dimming in a momentary flinch. The wall creatures clicked louder, urging retreat. The newcomer pulled back, hissing through a vibrating resonance. It wasn't trying to hit me, it was trying to stop the ancient being. But the ancient being stepped forward, towering even taller now. Its cracks illuminated the room in ghostly pale light, painting the walls in trembling shadows. A deep, layered hum emanated from its torso, vibrating the broken ceiling. The newcomer staggered backward, limbs splaying for balance. The air grew colder, so cold the tile beneath me frosted instantly. I could barely feel my hands or legs now. My eyelashes stiffened with freezing moisture. The ancient being pressed its limb forward. The newcomer let out a long, enraged screech. The two giants collided with a force that shattered the remaining bathroom tiles. Cold waves exploded outward from the ancient being. Shockwaves radiated from the newcomer. The wall creatures shrieked in frantic clicking, burying themselves deeper. The shadow creature curled tightly into a ball-like shape, trembling. Dust and plaster rained down in thick sheets. The motel groaned as though its bones might break. I covered my face as splinters of wood and tile flew across the room. The giants pushed against each other with impossible strength. The ancient being unleashed a pulse of cold so intense it froze midair dust particles solid. They fell like glass, tinkling across the cracked floor. The newcomer responded with a vibrating screech that pierced my eardrums. Blood dripped from my nose as the resonance tore through my senses. My vision blurred, swimming in a haze of cold and terror. The air warped, bending around their clashing energies. Reality itself felt stretched thin, trembling under the strain. The giants locked limbs, their faceless heads pressed together. The room shook like a ship in a violent storm. The ancient being suddenly shifted its weight, pushing the newcomer back a full foot. The hole in the room widened from the force of the movement. Fragments of broken floor fell into the darkness below. A deep roar rose from beneath the motel, something responding to the chaos. The newcomer recoiled, limbs shuddering from the ancient being's strength. The shadow creature scrambled across the wall, fleeing the giant's gravitational pull. The air seemed to pulse with panic from every unseen corner. The ancient being lowered its faceless head toward me. "You must leave." The newcomer whipped its limb forward, trying to strike the ancient being's cracked chest. But the ancient being caught the limb midair with chilling precision. The glow inside its body surged again, brighter than before. Frost spread across the newcomer's limb instantly. The newcomer hissed in agony, jerking backward violently. The ancient being advanced, relentless as a glacier. Its cold presence swallowed the room in heavy waves. My breath crystallized into tiny shards drifting to the floor. The ancient being spoke again. "You do not belong here." The word "here" struck me like a blow. Not just the motel. Not just the room. Not just Texas. I sensed it meant something deeper, an entire plane of existence. I staggered backward, grabbing the wall for support. The floor pulsed once beneath my feet. The hole in the next room widened again with a deep groan. Cold air roared upward like a subterranean storm. Something below was reacting to the ancient being's words. The newcomer lunged again, fast, violent. Its limb slammed against the ancient being's torso, cracking one of the glowing fissures. A burst of pale light exploded outward, nearly blinding me. Tiles shattered under the force of the impact. The ancient being's hum turned into a low, rattling vibration. The newcomer screeched triumphantly, pressing forward. The ancient being staggered, cracks flickering erratically. Dust filled the air in thick, choking clouds. The floor trembled like something beneath was waking fully. Suddenly, the ancient being exhaled a cold blast so powerful it knocked the newcomer off balance. The wall behind it froze solid in an instant, frost racing across every surface. The newcomer stumbled, limbs scraping desperately for traction. The ancient being straightened slowly, regaining its posture. Its cracks glowed brighter than ever, nearly white-hot with frozen energy. The hum inside its body deepened into a roar that shook the bathroom walls. All the clicking in the walls fell silent in terrifying unison. The ancient being leaned toward me again. "You must return." Its limb reached toward me. But not to attack. To take. To remove. To send back to wherever it believed I belonged. The cold grew unbearable, stabbing through every nerve. The newcomer lunged one final time, screeching in fury. Both giants collided with catastrophic force. And the floor beneath us gave way completely. The floor beneath the giants split apart with a violent, earth-shaking crack. The fractured boards collapsed simultaneously, creating a widening void that swallowed everything. The ancient being and the newcomer plummeted downward in a tangle of limbs and shadow. Cold wind roared out of the collapsing gap like a scream from the underworld. The motel's bones groaned as the foundation tore open beneath the weight. Dust and debris erupted in a thick cloud, filling the room with choking darkness. I staggered backward, losing my footing as tiles cracked beneath me. The bathroom floor tilted downward at a terrifying angle. For a moment, I thought I would fall with them. The ancient being's glow illuminated the darkness below as it fell, cracks pulsing like dying stars. The newcomer writhed, limbs flailing violently as it tried to anchor itself to the collapsing walls. Their overlapping roars drowned out every other sound, metallic screeches against low, freezing hums. The hole below them widened further, the motel collapsing into its own void. I watched in frozen terror as both giants disappeared into the depths. The cold vanished with them, sucked downward like a departing storm. The bathroom ceiling shook violently, chunks of plaster falling around me. The remaining floor groaned under the sudden absence of weight. And for a heartbeat, everything fell silent. Then the entire building seemed to sigh, a long, exhausted groan of surrender. The shadow creature scuttled across the broken wall, limbs flickering in panic. Its shape trembled as it watched the void spread through the neighboring room. The wall creatures clicked in loud, terrified bursts, sensing danger rising back upward. The void pulsed once, sending a deep vibration up through the cracked tiles. A faint glow emerged from far below, flickering like lightning trapped underground. I stumbled toward the corner, trying to stay on stable ground. Cold drafts surged upward from the hole, carrying dust and fragments of wood. The motel was collapsing into something it was never meant to touch. The bathroom floor groaned again, tilting further toward the broken edge. I pressed my hands against the wall, trying to steady myself. The shadow creature emitted a low, wavering hum, almost pleading. The clicking inside the walls returned, this time unified, rhythmic, urgent. It wasn't panic anymore. It was a command. The lesser creatures were signaling to one another in desperation. Their clicking grew louder, faster, almost creating a pattern. Something below was climbing back up. A massive limb shot upward from the void, slamming into the remains of the floor. I screamed as shards of tile exploded across the bathroom. The limb was familiar, jointed like the giants, but thinner, trembling violently. It wasn't one of the two. It was something else. Something from deeper beneath them. The shadow creature shrank into a corner, limbs curling defensively. The clicking inside the walls reached a fever pitch of terror. They knew what was rising. And they feared it more than the giants. The second limb emerged, longer and thinner than the first, shaking uncontrollably. Then a faceless head pushed upward, cracked in dozens of places like shattered stone. Cold light bled from the fractures, pulsating irregularly. This being wasn't whole. It wasn't stable. It crawled upward like something that had been awakened too early. Pieces of its body crumbled off, falling back into the darkness. But still it climbed, driven by instinct or hunger. The shadow creature let out a desperate screech. The malformed giant hauled itself halfway into the wrecked room. Its limbs wobbled with unnatural angles, barely supporting its weight. Cracks along its torso grew wider, light bleeding through in harsh bursts. Its faceless head turned toward me, twitching violently. I felt its gaze, though it had no eyes, press into my mind like knives. The cold returned in sharp spikes, stabbing through my skin. My legs trembled uncontrollably as the creature dragged itself closer. The walls behind me shook with the frantic clicking of terrified watchers. I pressed myself into the corner, nowhere left to go. The creature stretched one limb toward me, trembling, cracking, unstable. It dragged itself another inch across the shattered floor. Each movement made its body fracture further, small pieces falling away. It wasn't fully alive, at least not in the way the others were. It felt incomplete, unfinished, something caught between forms. A broken echo of the ancient beings. The glow inside its fissures pulsed unevenly like a dying heartbeat. Another limb reached toward me, shaking violently. The air grew so cold I felt my lungs freeze. Suddenly, a deafening roar erupted from the void below. The broken giant froze, limbs stiffening in midair. The shadow creature slammed itself against the wall in terror. The clicking inside the walls became chaotic static. Cold pressure rose upward like a geyser. A pulse of frozen light exploded from deep beneath the motel. The broken giant convulsed, cracks blazing bright white. Its faceless head snapped back violently. Its body began to collapse inward. Pieces of the creature shattered off in glowing fragments. Its limbs buckled, crumbling like brittle stone. The fissures across its torso burst open, releasing blinding cold. The wall creatures shrieked in clicking panic, retreating deep into darkness. The shadow creature curled into a tiny shape beside the door. The broken giant let out a final, hollow exhale. Its entire body fractured in a chain of sharp cracks. Light erupted from its core. And the creature disintegrated into dust. The dust spiraled upward in a glowing column, then was sucked violently downward. The void beneath the motel roared again, louder than ever. The floor trembled, shifting beneath my feet. I crawled backward, coughing, eyes watering from the shock. The cold faded slightly, though the air still vibrated with unseen forces. The shadow creature lifted its head, trembling like a frightened animal. The clicking inside the walls steadied, though still frantic. The void pulsed one final time. And then, silence. For the first time since entering room 12, the cold weakened. Not gone, just eased, like a shaken breath settling. The hole in the neighboring room still gaped open, but nothing climbed from it. The shadow creature crawled cautiously toward the broken floor, sensing the shift. It tapped the ground once, twice, testing stability. In the walls, faint clicking answered, calmer now. The air hung heavy with dust and fading frost. I wiped my eyes, shaking uncontrollably. And then the shadow creature turned its faceless head toward me. It was no longer trembling. It was no longer hiding. It rose slowly, limbs unfolding in tall, elegant arcs. It stepped toward the bathroom doorway, extending a thin, shadowy arm. Not in threat. In invitation. The cold around it softened, becoming almost tolerable. The motel groaned above us, settling into uneasy stillness. And the creature pointed toward the exit, as if telling me to follow. The shadow creature stood in the doorway, its long limbs forming a shape almost human but impossibly wrong. Its faceless head tilted gently toward the hall, as if urging me to move now, before the motel shifted again. Cold air drifted from its body in slow waves, no longer violent, but insistent. The floorboards behind it creaked with distant tremors, echoes of what still lurked below. The walls vibrated with faint, nervous clicking from the hidden creatures within. They were not warning me anymore, they were pleading for me to go. I rose shakily, gripping the broken sink for balance. My legs felt numb, my breath shallow. But I understood what they all wanted, leave the motel before it breathed again. I stepped toward the shadow creature carefully, expecting it to recoil or block my way. But it moved aside, limbs folding in an almost graceful arc, clearing a path to the ruined hallway. Cold seeped from its form, brushing my shoulder like a faint, ghostly hand. As I passed, it clicked softly, a quieter, slower pattern than the chaotic bursts before. A farewell, or a warning, or both. The hallway was half-collapsed, sagging under the destruction caused by the giants. Ceiling tiles hung loose like broken teeth. The silence stretched unnaturally through the corridor. Not peace, just the absence of movement. The floor dipped beneath my feet, making each step feel uncertain. Doorways along the hall were cracked open, darkness seeping from each room like spilled ink. Some rooms glowed faintly with frost from the earlier blasts of cold. Others were silent voids, as if their inhabitants, whatever they were, had retreated deep inside the walls. I moved slowly, afraid to disturb anything watching from the corners. The air felt thick, heavy, full of things unseen shifting just out of sight. But nothing attacked. Nothing followed. The motel felt exhausted, wounded, holding its breath. When I reached the staircase, the railing was split and warped, metal bent inward as if gripped by enormous strength. The steps groaned under my weight, sending echoes into the hollow darkness below. I kept my eyes forward, refusing to look into the gaps between the stairs. Somewhere deep beneath the motel, faint vibrations pulsed upward, slow, fading, distant. The giants had fallen far, and whatever lay below was settling once more. The clicking inside the walls returned, guiding me toward the exit with soft rhythms. The creatures weren't trying to scare me. They were showing me the way out. The lobby looked deserted, lights flickering in and out like dying stars. The front desk remained intact, though dust coated the counter and floor. The old man who had checked me in was nowhere to be seen. A faint smell of cold soil lingered in the air, mixing with mildew and age. As I passed the office door, the shadow creature's voice echoed faintly from behind me. Not words, just a soft, deliberate clicking. A goodbye. Or a final reminder. Leave. Outside, the night air hit me like a breath of life. Warm compared to the motel's freezing depths, almost comforting. The sky above was wide and open, stars scattered like distant lanterns. But the parking lot lay silent, cars coated in dust that hadn't been there before. Their windows were frosted from inside, patterns resembling claw marks etched in the condensation. The neon sign of the lone cactus flickered weakly, buzzing like a trapped insect. Half the letters were dark. The C blinked, sputtered, then died. The motel name dissolved into meaningless symbols. I reached my car and fumbled with the keys, hands shaking too violently to aim properly. The engine coughed, hesitated, then roared to life as though relieved to escape. As the headlights cut across the parking lot, I saw movement in the second-floor walkway. A faint silhouette leaned over the railing, slender, faceless, long-limbed. It watched me silently, head tilted at an unnatural angle. But it didn't move toward me. It simply observed. A guardian. Or a witness. I backed out of the lot, gravel crunching under the tires. The silhouette vanished from the railing. The motel sagged in on itself, lights dimming further with each passing second. As I turned onto the highway, a final tremor ran through the ground beneath the car. The motel's neon glow flickered once more, then blinked out completely. Darkness consumed the building behind me, swallowing it whole from the inside out. No shape crawled out. No creature followed. The silence that followed felt ancient. Miles passed before my breathing finally steadied. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror, afraid of what might be following the car. But nothing emerged from the darkness behind me. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, empty, quiet, almost peaceful. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that the motel hadn't released me entirely. The cold still lingered on my clothes, clinging like fingerprints. My reflection in the window looked pale, distant, changed. Something inside me felt hollow, echoing with faint clicking. The kind that doesn't stop. At the first gas station I found, I pulled in, desperate for light and human voices. But when I stepped out of the car, a chill ran down my spine. Not the cold of wind or night, something deeper, older. From the highway behind me came a faint vibration, almost like a heartbeat in the distance. The neon lights above hummed anxiously, flickering like motel signs. I listened closely, breath held tight. And then I heard it. A single, slow click. Coming from the shadows beyond the pumps. I walked inside the store, forcing myself not to look back. The warmth inside felt wrong on my skin, like it didn't belong to me anymore. The clerk asked if I was okay, but I couldn't find the words to answer. Because deep inside, I knew the truth. The motel hadn't simply let me go. It had marked me. Chosen me. Changed me. And somewhere far behind me, in the ruins of room 12, the clicking continued.